All right, we are recording. And then Brandy, I'll take notes. So yeah, you can run through the agenda, or I can run through the agenda and just take notes, or you can control it, whatever you like is easiest.
Okay. We'll just use the agenda as the presentation because I didn't do a slide deck. I didn't think we really needed one.
Yeah, I think this is good.
Yeah. We'll give everybody one more minute to hop on. Or do we admit everybody yet? Yeah. So yeah, we'll give people a minute to hop on.
Interesting. Some people can join join on their own, and then others have to be admitted. I'm not quite sure what magic button I pressed to make that happen.
Yeah, I don't know either. Everybody had to be admitted outside of the state emails.
I thought so. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have about 12 people. We want to start. Okay, it's already starting to record. So, yeah. So I just want to say hello to everybody. Happy Monday. And I'm glad you can join our March consult group meeting. And we have a couple of updates for you and a couple of discussion items later on the agenda. Apologize for sending it out today, but we got a little busy last week. So I appreciate your patience there. So next time we'll definitely send that out on Friday. We have a lot of really great updates for you all. Things feel like they're moving fast, but they're also feeling incredibly slow. But like I always say, this year is going to be a big year for the state. And as we move through March and the next several months, there's going to be a lot of items that we'll be discussing. So with that, I'm going to start out by talking about the BEAD challenge process. I'm going to hand this over to staff because I think, Megan, are you on the call? Or Jonas?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, do you want to cover this piece here since it's your division?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so a brief update on the BEAD challenge process. We received we received challenges to approximately 22,000 locations. The challenge window closed early February 9th, and we are still in the process of getting all those challenges processed, and then we'll send those out to the ISPs for rebuttal. Hopefully sometime this week, those notifications will go out, and then there's a 30-day rebuttal window from there. As far as the results of the challenge process, basically we get those rebuttals in, we make final decisions, and then we come up with a final eligible location map. That map will be submitted to the NTIA in late April, and then before we can publish it publicly or publish the final result publicly, we have to get approval from NTIA. So we're hoping that will happen sometime in May. The results of the challenge process do not automatically get incorporated into the FCC map. So that's sort of a separate process than what we're working on at the state right now. But we will have that published on our website and on all the BEAD related pages so you can access the BEAD eligible location map. And we'll publish that draft map before getting NTIA approval, just so you can see what it looks like. And once we get that approval, it'll be the official eligible location list. I'm probably forgetting something, but I can take questions. Or do we need to wait till the end for questions?
No, we can take questions as we go.
Okay. Okay. Looks like Ralph raised his hand.
I just want to make sure I understand what's on the screen here. So the SCC maps are not going to be updated. So they are what they are today relative to coverage and availability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so essentially the way the NTIA is running this process is that we start with the NTIA map and we run our challenge process and we make our changes. So it's sort of a branch off and it never branches back in to the FCC map. So we're sort of on the separate branch, and that's what we'll be using for the subgrantee selection process and the whole, BEAD granting process.
Okay, and then you say the next bullet is the CBO coverage maps will not be changed?
Yeah, so our general coverage maps are based on the FCC data. And so those won't be changed because the BEAD eligible locations are very specific to BEAD. And basically, there's a lot of overlap, but when we're talking about the general Colorado broadband map, unserved or underserved means it's below 120 and above 25.3, but we don't have all those extra, it can't be unlicensed fixed wireless, or it can't be, these technologies.
Mm.
So our Colorado broadband map is a lot more technology neutral. And then the BEAD eligible locations have all the rules that you find in the BEAD NOFO, like it has to be reliable technology, not subject to enforceable commitments from certain programs, and all those other details.
Right. Well, I was looking at the changes in the CBO coverage maps, coverage data between September and January. And it seems like there's been fairly significant changes in terms of coverage. And so we won't see how coverage may have changed due to the challenge process.
We'll have both of the data sets up there, but they're different data sets, so it's hard to compare one-to-one. But I'm happy to, we can walk through the differences, and my team can work on figuring out some visualizations so that we can, display those differences to the public and make sure people understand what those differences are.
Yeah, I think I have a pretty good handle on what the differences are. I've just been looking at region, but I think I have a pretty good handle on what the differences are, what's changed and hasn't changed, and what's new and what's not. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of that. It's just, I guess I wasn't expecting not to see any more coverage, anything coming from the challenge process that would affect coverage.
Yeah, and we're going to do some analysis and see, are there significant changes that we need to then submit to FCC based on our challenge process in order to get that information back into the main SCC map. But, it's new to all of us. as
Okay.
we're working through these processes. So, yeah, I'm happy to,
Yeah, we should
you
probably
know,
take this conversation
take some
offline.
suggestions and figure out the best way that we can communicate all these changes and
All right.
all the data.
I don't know if maybe I could schedule some time with you to sort of talk through this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I apologize for derailing things.
No, you're totally
No
fine.
worries.
That's what this is for. So, it's educate, ask questions, and confirm. So we want to make sure that we're on the same page with you as well. So it sounds like you and Megan will set time to just kind of walk through the next steps. Yeah, exactly. Good point, Lauren. You're consulting us. If something's not clear, we probably need to clarify it as a broadband office. So we appreciate you. Anything else you want to add, Megan, to the challenge process? No? Okay.
That's all I
Anybody-
have.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions or points of clarification before we move on to CPF?
I guess to Ralph's point about what he was talking to Megan about, the ISPs at least will have a layer that they can look at as far as building eligible location projects using those that are now opened up that are to successfully make it through the challenge process and the rebuttal process. So they at least can say, hey, we're going to use these addresses and we want to get funding for them. And then that sounds like, covers what you guys want out of, what the speed challenge process outcome will be, and opening up some additional addresses that may have been before the process not eligible at the very least. Which it all seems good. I think, maybe and don't let me put words in your mouth, Ralph, but maybe what we're looking towards is eventually trying to have some feedback even to the FCC, to where a notoriously inaccurate levels of mapping that we've always had to deal with, somewhat from these processes start to get a little bit more accurate over time as a goal. And is that kind of what you're like hoping that maybe also came out of it, besides just the BEAD eligibility, Ralph, or just something a little bit more than that we could be working
Yeah, I
towards
think-
something a little bit better?
Well, it's always good to overlay the eligibility data with the coverage data to understand the picture a little more clearly. It was just that, being able to do that once the challenges have been resolved would be nice. That's all.
Yeah, and we'll definitely do that kind of analysis. And yeah, if there are cases where we want to sort of essentially forward that information to the FCC, we have the ability to submit that information as a challenge. And then, I had another thought and I lost it.
One thing that I was wondering, Megan, maybe this will percolate up while I'm asking a kind of follow-up question, is just from what I saw in the challenge process, the difficulty as you get more into not that we have much of an urban area here, that's kind of you could probably say the entire county is rural, even, the incorporated parts of our towns and cities here in southwestern Colorado. But the further you got towards some central town or city, the more difficult it was to even think about challenging, because the onus was so much on the non-ISP to do that, where the ISPs hold all the cards, and they're the ones that say, in some cases, an address 2 or 3, maybe in an urban area, 8 or 10 times over, I can imagine, are saying that they're ineligible because they're served. So it's almost like this insurmountable mountain of evidence you'd have to produce, and who's going to do that? Where's the incentive lie for challenging those? But at the same time, we know that there are, especially in urban areas and in of the places that I cannot go and seek BEAD applications for, are ones that are infill in our more populated areas of my county, because of that difficulty because it's not just one ISP I have to challenge, it's multiple. And I imagine that just gets exponentially worse as you get onto the Front Range and you're trying to like fill in parts of Colorado Springs or Pueblo or something like that. So I'm thinking beyond BEAD, how are we gonna actually even get these, instead of these giant polygons that kind of like block out entire areas, start to get the service to the places that are really getting left out here, which are probably the ones that say they're already served by multiple entities that probably aren't in some cases. And I know addresses here that I knew like both of those are wrong. I do not have time in a month to get the amount of evidence that I need to say that that's not right. So I think going forward, that's going to be really hard to get those infills more accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing, the BEAD challenge process, the challenge window is over, but you can submit challenges to the FCC at any time, and we can then incorporate that data later on. So, if you have, and again, you don't have time to do all of this work, so that's another hurdle. But, if you have that information and have the time to submit to the FCC, that's an ongoing process that you can do at any time. There are some, nonprofits that are working on submitting challenges on behalf of various groups. They're mostly focused on state challenge processes right now, but that could be a resource if you're needing that help, or if you're doing any sort of broadband planning and have a consultant who can do some of that work for you, that's another avenue.
Okay. Right.
Or
well,
if you have some of that information, as much detail as you have, once we're done with this process, my team will have more time to go back and focus on the FCC map again. So there's potential we could start submitting, or we could research that area and look into submitting challenges for that area, and crunch some of the data for you so you're not spending your time on it.
Yeah, and that may help, certainly, especially if the FCC accepts those. On an address per address basis, it almost seemed like the problem was too large. I like your guys' approach, and I wish I probably included into that a little earlier, on the census block level, having per ISP having just like a half a dozen is enough to call it into question, that they have to then it puts the onus back on them. I just don't on the ISPs to prove that, at least for the BEAD. I thought that was a good approach, because then it's possible. I could go get 6 addresses or thereabouts, getting all of them and doing them one at a time for all of the potential wrong ones in a county seems like, well, who's going to have time for that? I'm sure with the mapping resources that you guys have within CBO and your department, you realize that's less like what a labor effort that could be. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've submitted some successful bulk challenges to the FCC on availability. So we could take a look at, specific area. If we have an area to focus in on, we can do that specific research and see if it, if it fits what we know how to do. So yeah, I'd be happy to chat with you offline at some point as well.
Yeah, that'd be good as a post-BEAD kind of focus. Like, how do we make things better as far as the mapping? So that'd be a great conversation to have.
Yeah.
So thanks, Megan.
Great. Awesome. Great. If there's nothing else on the challenge process, we'll move along to the CPF process. And Jonas, do you want to touch a little bit on where we are with that process and some of the next steps?
Yeah, be happy to. So the team's been pretty busy the last 6 weeks or so working through the expected awards and challenges that were brought to the table. And for the most part, the dust has settled from all of that. Right now, we're looking at 18 project awards that we're moving forward with without any challenges. And then we have 8 that were challenged And after further review, those are moving forward as well. Finally, there is one award that we unfortunately had to revoke due to every site for the project being challenged and the required level of evidence and documentation being submitted to justify the CBO not funding the award in an attempt to avoid overbuilding that area. Also, with supporting these CPF awards and prepare for BEAD, the team has been busy implementing the new advanced grants portal, which is a state-of-the-art portal we've integrated into Salesforce that will allow awardees to experience a more streamlined and automated grant management experience or interface with the CBO, which essentially allows us to work more efficiently going forward. And to prepare for these CPF awards, we've been hosting welcome calls with the awardees to provide insight on some of the more important sections of the grant agreement that we want to make sure our partners are well versed on. So a lot of excitement around CPF as we move closer to executing grants and starting deployment later this year.
Great. Thanks, Jonas. Yeah, we are rounding out that program, which has been really great. We've been working on it for a few years now. And I just want to highlight, the team and some of the differences between maybe some of you who have worked with CBO in the past on our grant programs, but we're putting a lot of effort on the front end to eliminate or at least mitigate some of the confusion around these big federal programs. If I could rewind the clock back on ARPA, we just didn't have a lot of time to really stand up that program in a way that, eliminated some of the confusion around the federal guidelines, and the federal government was continually issuing guidance as those funds are being rolled out. So, we've had plenty of time with CPF, and we want to make sure that everybody can successfully execute these agreements and their projects. And so we're putting a lot of time in educating folks ahead of time. Federal programs are pretty robust, and it's not for the meek at heart. You kind of have to, have your ducks in a row to really get through some of the minutia, if you will, and all of the requirements. So we're spending a lot of time on it, and we're automating it. So this is really great. We're moving away from those PDFs that we use in the Broadband Deployment Fund. And actually, when the Broadband Deployment Fund gets reinvented or whatever version it becomes after the sunset review, that will also be an automated process too. So really looking forward to streamlining it and making it more efficient for everybody, and doing a lot of comms on the front end to help folks. So we're always open to feedback on that process once it gets rolled out, but we've spent a lot of time. So Jonas, thank you to the team and everybody here from CBO on that. It's a big deal, and it continues to be a big deal for us. So if there's anything that's missing or wrong or doesn't look right, as always, please let us know. We're open to feedback. We want to make sure it works well for our stakeholders. Great. Does anybody have any questions on CPF? Great. We'll pump out updates on that, publish updates on that once we're officially through all of the challenges. Not many, which is great. Really expected a lot more, but I think we really vetted a lot of these applicants and stuff. So we didn't have too much on the duplication efforts. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of discussion items, and this is where I'm soliciting your input. So I know you haven't had probably much time to think about it, but I just want to plant some seeds here for you and to see what your initial takes are on these 4 items. I'm going to start with the BEAD extremely high cost per location threshold approach. So we said at our last meeting that we would present a high level thoughts on what the CBO might incorporate in that exercise. It's required by the NTIA. And quite frankly, it's a really helpful exercise for all of our grant making as we move forward on the federal side, but as well as the state side. As you know, the costs keep going up. And so even today, I will tell you that it's a lot more than we thought it was a couple years ago. So we're tracking it, we're staying on top of it. But one of the things that we did in the CPF program, and for those maybe who are less familiar, in the CPF program, we split the state up into 2 tiers. One of the tiers was allocated more money with a portion allocated more of these CPF dollars because we considered those the most unserved and underserved areas of the state and the most expensive. We also required less of a match, so it was 25% of a match towards CPF. The other tier were included counties that we had allocated a little bit less money, so it was a 75-25% split between the 2 tiers. 75 received more money, was less of a match. The other 25% was less money, but more of a match because these are areas that have a lot more resources. Still had unserved and underserved areas. And we rolled that out. We received public comment and so forth. So, we felt pretty good about soliciting people's input. Some folks were fine with it. Others felt that they were being treated unfairly, in that we should be treating everybody the same. And that, and I think really that the pain point in those comments were, we want the 25% match, and we want more money. And so, so it was more of a financial feedback than anything else. And then also, being fair and equitable and everybody getting the same deal. And I think fairness and equity, treating everybody the same is it's one of those things that we hear a lot from industry, and local government and everybody else. So it's not just an industry thing. So I want to talk a little bit about the approach with extremely high cost and just get some feedback on that, because we could essentially, based on what we experience in CPF, and really we're solely basing this off of CPF and what our stakeholders told us, we could treat the entire state the same, give everybody the same deal, give everybody the same approach with high cost. Now, the reality of that, there's not much of a reality in giving everybody, assessing the extremely high cost and applying it to everybody in the state the same way, because as you guys know, some states of the area are more expensive than others. But what we heard really strongly in CPF was we weren't treating everybody fairly because we broke up the state. And so we did that based on data. So we ended up going back and tweaking the CPF program to include more counties in the tier, the 75% tier, where there was more money allocated and less of a match. But that made that tier way more competitive. So more people probably walked away with less money because we had more people in that category. Now, granted, it's just, and that happened just because of where the data pointed it. So, I mean, when you talk about those extremely high cost areas and the most number of unserved and underserved, it was going to be more competitive. But I just want to see what your thoughts are with that, because you can't have it both ways. And so we are going to put this out for public comment. And I want to socialize this approach here first, and then we'll bring it back. We'll do some analysis because we have some consultants helping us. And when we present to you what we're thinking next month, I want to make sure that I've accounted for some of those ideas and thoughts at this meeting. And so hopefully that description makes sense, the history of why we did it in CPF, and potentially applying it to BEAD, because it's very similar. It's a slightly different because you do have to, use, there's a lot of parameters around the high cost. It's per location threshold. So, but I just want to socialize that idea here. And I'll stop there and let people chime in. So Ralph, you have your hand up first. So I'll take your question or comment.
Could you be a little bit more explicit about what changes were made, the threshold, in order to make the shift and just, as you said, make it more equitable? I'm not sure I understood. Are you saying that you made more regions and areas available for the threshold than before? Or
yeah, we did. And Megan, are you still on the call? Did she
Yes,
pop
I'm
up?
still here.
Okay. Can you tell people, because we had to bump up one of the data point, and I can't remember which data point it was. I think we went from 75% to 80%, that threshold that that ended up including more counties in that 75% tier for CPF.
Oh, now you're testing my memory.
I know I totally put you on the spot. So I apologize because I know it's a cruel thing to do on a Monday. But let me pull up the
So
map.
the factors we used were based on the coverage percentage and the adoption rate, which is not called that from the Census American Community Survey, and the number of unserved locations. So there are some, there's some counties where, they have a high number of unserved locations, but a low percentage because it's a high population county. So that factored in, and I think there was one or two more factors. And I think we bumped up that subscription percentage to include more counties, or bump down, up or down, whichever included more. I can get more details if y'all want to follow up.
I'm just curious as to what was the factor that changed that caused more regions to be covered by the 75%. I'm just sort of curious as to what was the, maybe it might be helpful. I guess you're going to present this all next month, which is sort of what are the factors and how are you weighting them and that sort of thing. In terms of making these determinations. Okay. I guess I'll wait for that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
I'm eating. Sorry. The other question I had was, how are you determining what's the extremely high cost addresses at this point? I mean, what matrix or what criteria are you applying to even determine those? Because that kind of could affect how you treat regions differently, region to region, how you're getting to those addresses at all. Because I'm somewhat unclear of how those are being determined.
Yeah, so we're working on that criteria. I guess maybe I'll just clarify kind of what the question I'm asking, because I'm not necessarily asking about methodology or criteria, because we can split the state out into different regions to be really specific around high cost per location thresholds, because they're different. So for example, in CPF, a lot of the regions that we funded were at 83, 8,500 per passing, and there were some regions that we didn't fund because the per passing was, for fiber in particular, was $20,000-$30,000 per passing. And then you have areas in on the Front Range, just outside the urban corridors, that have unserved and underserved locations where it's not $10,000 or $20,000 per location. So really high level, stripping away all the methodologies and details, the approach that we could take based on the feedback we heard from the CPF program, because there was a lot of folks that were a little bummed out that we treated people differently, and we did it based off of some of the methodologies that Megan mentioned, which were solid methodologies. At the end of the day, I don't know if people really they gravitate towards the methodology other than they see themselves as being treated differently. So you could go on and on about data, and we did, and we talked about it. We did our roadshow. We talked about the methodology, but for some people, the CBO is treating their region differently, and so we were talking, because we had our first kind of reveal of some high cost data from our consultant, and we're going to collect more that has it. We could split it up by urban versus rural, which there's some rhetoric behind that, but if we're really being fair to everybody, what should be really obvious is, like, we are treating your region based on those regional dynamics around cost. And so this is your cost per location threshold, which is going to be very different than the Eastern Plains. So the technology mix is going to be different. The match requirement's going to be different, very similar to CPF. Because in the BEAD program, wherever you set your high cost per location threshold, you can facilitate match waivers in the BEAD program, right? So we're going to see people, if we do it regionally, I mean, it's probably the most precise way to kind of set up the state. But if based on what we heard from folks, during CPF, there was a strong desire for the CBO to kind of treat everybody the same, regardless of costs and different methodologies, coverage, and everything else. Because people, I think a lot of it was that financial piece. They would get the match waiver. They would have less of a match. They'd have more funds allocated to them, regardless of the data. And so I just want to see, based on kind of some of those scenarios, when we go back to the drawing board, well, not the drawing board, when we go back to kind of come up with our kind of draft, if you will, to kind of share with this group at a very high level, what do you think about the treat everybody the same approach, or treat those regions differently based on those cost dynamics and coverage dynamics? In the spirit of treating everybody the same and everybody's getting the same deal. Go ahead, Ralph.
It's really simple. Whichever way you go, people are going to complain.
Yeah.
It's that simple. I mean, I don't care what you do. People are going to complain, right? I think back to the reason why, your charter for BEAD, right, is to connect, the maximum number of households in Colorado to the highest speed internet that you can with the funds allocated, right? And my personal feeling and my personal advice, you're the one whose ear's going to get chewed off, is you should do the thing that meets that goal. And as you point out, different regions have different dynamics, and those are going to call for different thresholds. And making those decisions are going to be really hard, and people are not going to be happy. And I just think that's the way it's going to be.
That's really great, Ralph. And yeah, we know we're going to make some people upset, and thank you for starting with that. But I do appreciate your comment about do what's best for connecting the most people, which would require a different approach per region. But I definitely want to hear from Eric too. So
Yeah, and if there's others that have comments that don't want to dominate at all, but it's definitely been thoughts that I had. I mean, when you came out with the CPF kind of tier 1, tier 2 counties, and it wasn't just because my county was falling in tier 1 and it benefited them, but I thought that almost made sense. And I think I understood as well that BEAD was not going to have the same criteria that I got from you guys, that CPF, that's the way you were choosing to do that. For one thing, it was a smaller amount, so you could kind of focus on these, I would almost say, traditionally underserved counties first. And I think that's largely what it did. And there's reasons why they have been underserved. So if you kind of get some momentum started with those and some, still hit your numbers that I know you wanted with the number of served addresses, but hitting some locations that traditionally had not had the ISPs rushing to do fiber to the home projects just by the pure economics of it, then you've accomplished a large degree of momentum in those traditionally underserved counties. And that can actually build into BEAD. In fact, I'm counting on it, because they're going to be here. I'm getting a whole new provider in my county that now they're going to have adjacent addresses, that they now have resources that they can build off to. Even for those that are ineligible for BEAD, they just may build to them now that that's started. And if you can do enough of a checkerboard approach across the state of that same thing with BEAD, and I know the focus is a little bit different from your what you have to stay within from the NTIA on that too. So you have a different set of rules that you aren't as flexible on that, because that was the other thing with CPF, right? You had some more flexibility about your plan, where BEAD is a little bit more set. And if you do have some flexibility, I'm with Ralph. I can't tell you the right way to go, because somebody's gonna get left out no matter what. But I think having a little bit more of a level playing field is probably a good tactic to approach, but then looking at still having some flexibility if they give you that to look at the specific dynamics of each area. They said, hey, we didn't get a CPF grant. We still have a ton of eligible locations that didn't get served with CPF that now still that's the object is to get these served. So to look at those and say, but we have twice the expense of some other region that, because we have rock and they can plow it in rather than having to do, rock hammer to get to these addresses. So there's still going to be those regional dynamics that I'm hopeful that you could still consider and, use this as this once in a generational opportunity to get to addresses that weren't served. But I think we would understand in this area that there's a little bit more of a across the board approach with the state, and it wouldn't be just a tier 1, tier 2 county or the matching being different or things like that.
Yeah, it could be all of this. It could be all of the above, right? Based on what you said. And I think when in asking this question, I think if we're being true to the goal of the BEAD program, we can't treat everybody in Colorado, every region the same, because we will leave people behind, right? So if we said it's 100% fiber for everybody, we might not get as far. We might not be capturing the true costs of what it's going to take to build out and connect everyone. So yeah, and I think BEAD, there is some flexibility. There's not a ton. There's some similarities, but we kind of, and we did mirror a lot of what we were doing in the CPF program with some of the BEAD guidance we had at the time. Now, it wasn't specific, it wasn't like the BEAD NOFOs and so forth, but we took a lot of the intent of the BEAD program and applied it to CPF as well, in our own using our own methodology. So we had that flexibility. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts? Because I know we haven't heard from Carrie or Dan or Matt, Nathan, Sandra. Anybody have any thoughts on any of it?
I think whatever works and is most effective in giving the most people a quality and accessible system, whether it's, cost and coverage in different regions, but I don't think it should be based on who gets equals amounts of funding, as long as they need the funding to build it out, to expand this program, and the most people have access to an equitable and accessible service.
Yeah, I second that sentiment.
Okay.
But if my only thoughts that I've had, and I think it opens up a bigger can of worms than anything, is if everybody's treated equal, but the scoring criteria weighs things differently, it comes out in the way the scoring criteria is developed based on technology type or availability. But that's very hard to get it balanced right. And I think it gets way more complicated in the end, just to tweak scoring criteria in order to treat everyone the same.
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, inherently with the scoring criteria, you can't achieve
right
equitable outcomes across the board, because ultimately someone's going to get a yes and somebody's going to get a no, depending on who's bidding on it based on criteria. Okay. Yep. Go ahead, Ralph.
I was just going to say, and this is totally obvious, is you just need to be really transparent on what you're doing, and just, have your bullet points on why the criteria is the criteria, and why does that make it equitable and things like that. So you just have to have your story really, really, really clear.
Okay. Well, I'm actually pulling a couple of bullet points for this conversation, so this is really helpful. All right. Good. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right. I know we're going to probably run out of time for the next 3, but I want to talk a little bit about, and we can punt some of these a little bit later, but I want to talk a little bit about Build America, Buy America, BABA. And just an FYI, the NTIA developed a process for waivers, some really good guidance on BABA waivers, February 22nd, so just recently. And really the point of bringing this up is I just want to go over it. It grants waivers and partial waivers for certain elements of the BEAD program, where you can utilize certain products outside of the U.S. and provides guidance on manufacturing processes performed for those technologies in the U.S. In specific product categories. Part of that includes fiber optic cables, electronics, and it also grants partial waivers for enclosures and manufacturing activities associated with those closures. I'm not going to go into too much detail on everything that's in the waiver categories, but I think this is a little bit of good news for the broadband space, since a lot of this technology we don't source in the United States. And so looking at that, I think the NTIA, and I don't want to kind of insert my bias here, but it's been something I've been really nervous about from the start. And then, I guess the other piece to this too, and just for those that work in the broadband space on products and manufacturing, or you follow it, do you think that the waivers that the NTIA has developed, do you think this will have a positive impact on your lead times for supply chain issues that have been pretty obvious and apparent over the last several years as far as broadband related activities? And did we miss anything? Did the NTIA miss anything? Because one of the things they ask us too all the time is for feedback. Now, whether that gets incorporated is to be determined, but they do ask us for our thoughts. So I just want to see what you guys think about the BABA waivers. Do you see it being a good thing? Do you see it helping with lead times? What do you think about it? So I'll stop there and see, open up the floor for anybody who has any thoughts on it. No? I see you over there shaking your shoulders, Ralph.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say on that one.
Carrie, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I know you represent a huge group. Are you hearing anything in your circles about the NTIA's waivers?
I have not heard anything specifically, but I actually have a meeting with my members tomorrow. So let me ask them and I can circle back with you on that specifically.
Okay, that would be great. I would be curious to see if it impacts any lead times on the materials people are using, because I know we like to track that too, because it helps us communicate realistically how long things are going to take, and we can plan around some of our programs as well. So if you have any insight, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to get that feedback and circle back with you.
Okay, cool. Great. Okay. Is there any, okay, well, since there's nothing else on BABA, I'm going to move on to labor requirements and broadband projects. So for this current legislation, we have a labor bill moving through the process called House Bill 2024-1245. And so, the bill itself, just in a nutshell, it basically, it's a bill that requires various labor requirements on ISPs and people doing broadband. Some of what, and it's based off of the BEAD NOFO, and it also includes some recommendations outside of the BEAD NOFO on, fair labor, Davis-Bacon, a bunch of other elements of labor, as well as compliance with OSHA standards and various labor practices. And then, so hiring local, which, is always a good thing, of course, but it's more of a mandate at this point. So those are just some of the provisions in the bill. The other piece of it is, there's a per project threshold, like financial threshold for when it applies, which is anything under $500,000. Anything under $500,000 would not have to meet the standards in the bill. And so we ended up asking some of our ISP stakeholders about the bill, and we it was just a select group that usually gives us a lot of input on different things and various matters and items. But we asked a variety, so small, large ISPs. We actually worked with a cooperative as well, asked some questions. And so, the feedback was mixed. A lot of the ISPs are doing various elements in the bill, and as well as the NOFO, the BEAD NOFO, and some of it was, we already are hiring local. We're hiring train. We do our own in-house training for our local employees. Really, because it's more of a workforce thing for them. They do follow standards to make sure things are safe. I'm not saying every ISP is doing that, but the ones we asked are doing that. For some of the other requirements in the bill, some of them they did say it would be expensive and it would deter some ISPs from applying altogether. And so we have a mix of folks doing what's in the legislation in the bill, House Bill 1224-1245. But the other items that that aren't required would probably be a deterrent for BEAD. And so those were some of the ideas. Those were some of the feedback items we got on the bill. And I just wanted to ask this group, and I know I don't know if you've been following it, but in addition to the NOFO for BEAD, I mean, what is the right balance for CBO? Should we look at going above and beyond the NOFO and including more labor standards? Do you see this being an issue amongst the stakeholders that you're engaging with, your industry? Do you feel like folks are following labor standards, fair practice labor standards, hiring local, fair wages, training people to make sure that they're safe and they're doing these jobs, and installing technology and equipment the way they're supposed to be? I just want to get a sense of if this is an issue for those on the call in your respective fields, subject matter experts in your field. So I just want to pause there and see if there's anything that in addition. Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, our members are looking at this and trying to figure out where we come down on it. But I definitely think, especially for the smaller companies, there are some concerns here. I just think it's challenging to meet some of the standards and requirements, especially in the rural areas with smaller companies and the workforce challenges in and of itself. I'm happy to provide more detailed feedback on this to you, and plan to provide it to Sandra and others as well. But just wanted to kind of share that.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be great to get your feedback, Carrie, because I know, again, you represent a lot of members, and just want to know what you're hearing, if there's anything that we're missing at the CBO or anything that we need to accommodate as we move forward with these programs so that we can maximize participation in these programs.
Absolutely. Happy to do that.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Sandra?
Yeah, I just want to add, and we're open to meeting with any stakeholders who have any questions about it, who would like to see if there's any compromise in our bill. Of course, we don't know if it's going to pass, but we know what it does do is keep from misclassifying workers. As far as 1099 workers, we know that directly employed workforces do a better job and have an interest in the work they're doing versus being paid as a 1099. We also know that jobs are underscored in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And one of the intents of this was also to, of course, buy, American-made products and actually create good jobs, not just any job, because in Colorado, we know how expensive it is to live and the wages have been stagnant. And now, is the opportunity with this funding as well to have for people, men and women, to have a family sustaining wage, that those who are not traditionally represented in these fields have access to that training, which is a nationally marketable skill that they can keep forever, even if that ISP goes out of business or whatever, they can go to another state and still have this skill. So I think that was some of the intent of this bill, and we just want to make sure that it is available for Coloradans in the communities where this will be built out and not just, out of town, out of state groups come in and do the work, which they have no vested interest. And then once they're long gone, then errors are discovered and a community could be down for weeks and months, and someone else has to come in and redo that work. So thus part of our concerns with the labor issue and just having good jobs also represented under this, the BEAD funding.
Okay, thanks for that, Sandra.
And again, to meet with any stakeholders, such as, reach out.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for that. Thanks for making yourself available. I know we're in the middle of the process, so we'll see how things shake out. But just want to put that out there because we definitely CBO supports making sure we have livable wage jobs and things are doing. Broadband's being built and including various safety standards and training workforce. So we just need to see what our role is in that and just take that feedback. So, but anyway, I know we're running out of time. We're over right now. So I've already taken more time than I had on the schedule. We'll get to rip and replace next time. Just a heads up on rip and replace. There's a couple of bills going through the state legislature on rip and replace. Senate Bill 24-151. Telecommunication security, and Senate Bill 24-147, which is streamline the updating of telecommunication equipment. So just want to put that out there. I hope you guys are looking at those, but this has a lot to do with the rip and replace, making sure that we have secure broadband equipment going into being put into use, and for those technologies that are compromised to security or being taken out, there is funding available to remove telecommunication equipment that is not compliant with national security or state security standards, or just security in general. And so I just want to let you know that Senator Hickenlooper worked on a bill to support. It's called the Defend Our Networks Act. So I encourage you to look at it. It allocates $3 billion of unobligated ARPA dollars to fund the shortfalls in the FCC's program. So there's a lot of people applying, a lot of companies are applying for that funding, but it's running out. So any unobligated dollars would be used essentially to make that program whole, hopefully, because I know it's expensive. And so I just, if you guys have any feedback in between now and then, how it's going, what you're hearing about it, please let us know, because the Senate Hickenlooper's team asked us if we're hearing anything in the field about that act and what he's doing. So we definitely want to talk to him. And if you have any concerns or comments or anything like that, please let us know. Just shoot us an email and I'll let his staff know. But allocating those dollars to help facilitate that is I think is a good thing. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and meet again in April. We'll send this recording out to those who couldn't attend. And I just want to say I appreciate the time you guys took today and a few minutes extra. I find these conversations really helpful and informative to our work. And I can't wait to share with you what we're working on next time. So enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.